Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along today as well. My colleague Yusuf Mjini is with me. Brother Yusuf, how you doing? Yeah, and I see Kamal King as well. Kamal, how are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. And yourself?
I'm doing well. And my writing partner, Brenda Lyle Gray. Brenda, how you doing? Good to see you.
Fine. Hello, Kamal, classmate.
Listen, today we're going to have a great conversation. Who's on screen with us right now is a person who's a civil rights advocate and fighter and worker, Bree Spencer, right? Bree, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. So nice to meet you.
So
Thanks
Bree
for having
Spencer
me on.
is the policing program manager at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And they got a project called Accountable Now. And last week it released its analysis of the Minneapolis Police Department's use of force data. The Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights launched Accountable Now in February as a first of its kind national repository of police use of force data. There is no national standard for use of force data or national requirement for local law enforcement agencies to collect and report it. And so Accountable Now wants to change that by collecting, analyzing, and making this information available to the public. Minneapolis is among the 9 new cities whose data were released in the report last week. The Minneapolis Police Department's data reveals massive racial disparities in use of force against civilians. Between 2017 and 2019, Black people comprised of roughly 55% of victims of the Minneapolis Police Department's use of force. However, per 2019 U.S. Census Bureau estimates, Black people make up just 19.2% of the city's population. In that same period, the number of times police officers used electronic control weapons or controlled energy weapons, we call them tasers, against civilians increased by 73%. And so we're here to talk about that, about the national study and about what it means for the city of Minneapolis. Bree Youssef is here with me in Twin Cities. He's in St. Paul. I'm in Minneapolis. We're both long-time communicators, organizers, and leaders in the community. Kamal King is in Atlanta. He's an attorney and is a regular participant in this Thursday session. Kamal King and Brenda Lyle and I were all classmates in the 3rd grade and 4th grade. In fact, Brenda and I were at kindergarten together in Kansas City. So we've got this connection of being together for a long period of time, and even if not physically close, connected by experience, by expectation of our community and of our time. And here we are again, attempting to provide witness to the world we've participated in and to the world we want to create as responsible human beings. So pleased to meet you, Bree. I'm going to ask you to wade in, just jump in to the purpose, the mission, the vision, and then we'll take it from there. This is an informal conversation, and all of us are welcome to join and to raise questions and share observations and insights. Bree, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, it's just an absolute good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here. Since we got the invitation, I've been watching some of your other podcast sessions, and I'm really excited to be here today and meet all of you. You did a great job introducing the project, Al, so I'll try not to repeat, but essentially the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights has been advocating for a national police use of force database that's available to the public for 7+ years, and eventually just hit a wall with everything that was going on. I was like, fine, we'll try to make it ourselves. So that's what Accountable Now is. As you know, there is some national reporting that happens with police use of force through the FBI. It was UCR, now it's NIBRS, but It's not mandatory. Not every jurisdiction has to report into it. It's typically tied to federal grant funds, and not every jurisdiction gets those federal grant funds. So it's a workaround for mandatory that doesn't work. And they were, particularly when they were doing UCR, I think they just transferred in the last year to a new style of gathering data. But when they were doing the UCR, it was only asking for firearm discharges and police homicides. So when we talk about the myriad of different ways police can use force that were missing from that tabulation, I mean, it's legion. It's so significant. And so that's part of the picture, and what we're trying to do with Accountable Now is the idea is we want a national use of force database that's available to the public. We want a national standard of collection for every jurisdiction. So we don't want this mishmash of, city A collects 2 types of use of force, city B collects 5, and city C collects 13, and none of them have the shared definitions and categories, right? Part of the project of Accountable Now was to create this standardized use of force definitions as 25 categories with definitions. And we'd like that to hopefully inform the national standard and required standard for policing. That is available on the website. It's on accountablenow.com, and you can actually download it. One of the things let me go back. Okay, big picture. So the goal is to shine a light on how abysmal the police use of force collection infrastructure is, to create this repository and data explorer functionality in a website that's available to the public, and to create tools that local advocates can use to both inform the transformation they're advocating for, but also put muscle behind what they're advocating for at the local level. So on the site right now, there's two pieces. There's a progress map, which is essentially like a repository of raw data sets. We have about 136 data sets on there, meaning from 136 municipalities or jurisdictions, with more on the way all the time. And then on the other side of the site, we have the data explorer function, which is more harmonized and then analyzed data. So that's really where, part of this puzzle is if raw data should be available to the public, but also a lot of people could use some additional context when they're looking at raw data. And so we're hoping to build in the city specific pages, of which Minneapolis is one, some functionality so that local advocates can have some data science reviewed visualizations, some recommendations. Going forward with the site, we hope to develop a scorecard so we can actually give cities a score against our standard for use of force, and help local folks take that to their common council, take it to their police department and say, hey, this is where we see falling short, or this is where we have questions. What can we do from here? So that's kind of the 30,000 foot view, if that's helpful.
Your goal, as I see it, is to collect use of force data from 1,000 law enforcement agencies this year. Where are you along that path?
Yeah, we're not far. We're at about 136. Sometimes police departments give us information that we can't put on the website. Like, for example, someone's specific, there we go. My office suite is choosing to update at the moment. Sorry, I just had to X out of that. I have some other data sets that I have to go through and just take out personally identifying information. Like, we can't have birthdays in there. We can't have people's specific names, for example. So once I do that, we should be up to around 142 data sets. Here's what we're learning from this process, right? Let's talk about FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. Ostensibly public information, right? But when you actually go through the process of putting in a FOIA request, wide variability from police departments on cost, on whether or not they get back to you, on what information they're going to make available to you. And so I think initially we thought FOIAs were going to be a really significant way of getting this information into the site. It's still a big piece for us, but right now I'm looking to diversify our sources because it takes forever to get these FOIA requests fulfilled. Mm-hmm. Some of that is because police departments don't have, and this is legitimate, don't have the office staff or officers riding a desk who know how to pull the information, can turn it over fast enough. But it also has to do with, I have a lot of questions about the costs that we're incurring from doing these FOIA requests. And I'm like, if information costs $10,000 to get it, is it really available to the public?
Right.
I got questions about that.
Yeah. No, if you have a PowerPoint that you want to share, you're welcome to. You want to walk us through some of the elements or the philosophy or the concept, we're able to do that. It's your call, Bree. But thank you so much
I do have
for
one.
this.
I'm sorry. I do have one if you want me to.
Yeah, go ahead. Go right ahead. You can, I think you should be able to screen share. And then to Youssef and to Kamal and Brenda, jump in when you want to on any questions or comments.
I wanted to ask Bree a couple of questions while she's looking for her PowerPoint. You have information from 136 police departments. Pardon me. How representative are those 136 departments in terms of the diversity of the country?
That's a great question. So in the initial read, I think they went off of population. So they tried to shoot for larger cities. For this, so that was 200 that we did in the first batch with a pro bono, like a law firm that's doing it pro bono. In the second batch we did, I was around for that one for the request we put in. So Accountable Now is a leadership conference project. We have partners that work specifically with us on Accountable Now. The biggest one is NORC, N-O-R-C, at University of Chicago. It's a group of data scientists. They went through and did an analysis of cities. They took the next 150 cities after the first 200, and they looked to see proportionality for like city, suburb, and rural, and tried to get the numbers a little bit more proportional to like how it works in the United States, right? So it's not perfect. We always are going to focus a little bit more on cities, but this next batch has a little more suburbs and a little more rural jurisdictions in it as well.
It's a difficult task because you've got 17,985 police departments altogether. Can you share with us the 9 cities on which the Leadership Conference, which does excellent work, prepared individual reports?
Yeah. So yes, pardon me. Let me mute just a second. Okay. So when the initial launch happened, we had 5 cities on the site. And then this next launch, this phase 2, had an additional 9 cities. So altogether there are 14. Let me just grab the website really quick because I don't necessarily have it memorized.
Not a problem. I'm curious.
I probably should by now.
I'm curious whether the capital city of Minnesota, St. Paul, is included, because a lot of people are surprised to learn that the largest number of officer-involved killings in Minnesota is the capital city of St. Paul. And when we looked at use of force data for the city of St. Paul several weeks ago, although we're only 16% of the population, we make up, Black community makes up 46% of the stop and search, and 75% of the use of force cases were against young men of color 18 to 25 years of age. And I'm wondering if you did a similar breakdown based on age within use of force.
Nope, we don't have a breakdown on age yet. These initial 14 cities, 5 and then 9, are we had to do what NORC calls normalize and then harmonize this data, which took up a huge amount of the time, energy, and effort that went into getting this out on the site. So basically, because police departments record this stuff, just for listeners who may not know, there's so much variability in the way departments record this information.
Sure.
You really can't compare cities to cities. Yeah. And so they undertook this harmonization process. So they created that standard, the 25 categories, and then they went through each city's department and mapped their use of force data to that standard. So that's how we're able to do a little bit of comparison now, because we're trying to, instead of apples to oranges, we're trying to do something much more like apples to apples. So that's what took so long for this second phase. And what we're hoping to do in the next phase is to do more in-depth analysis with NORC on the kinds of questions you're asking, Youssef. I will say I'm really glad you brought up St. Paul, because we don't have St. Paul. I don't even think we have a data set from St. Paul in the site right now. I would love for us in the long term to get more metro area data sets, right? So you could see, like, so I work for a DC organization, but I'm based in Milwaukee. And in Milwaukee, the metro area is really large and very different from the city itself. So I'd like to see, Milwaukee, Wauwatosa, Shorewood, like West Allis all together and compare that way. So I'm hopeful that in the future we could have something like St. Paul and Minneapolis and look at them next to each other. I think
Yeah,
that could be really impactful.
the ACLU here did do an analysis of the two cities, and the city of St. Paul did release stop and search citations and also use of force for the city of St. Paul. So it is all available. And did we lose Bree, Al?
Looks like we might have, but maybe she'll come back in a second. She'll come back in.
Okay. Yeah, the Leadership Conference does excellent research, and they've been doing it for a number of years. So kudos to them for taking the effort and for working with NARC to make it available. And I hope that we will be able to look at the Twin Cities and the metropolitan area, because it's a tremendously important tale. And I can forward that information to you if you'd like, and then you can publish it or share it at your wish.
I'd be glad to publish it. I think it's important information. The discussion is important, and the initiative they've undertaken, I think, is significant. I want to ask her when she comes back, what are the 9 cities and what data she has, and maybe that's what she was trying to organize as the PowerPoint that would summarize findings so far in the 9 cities. But it's interesting that we begin to put what we have intuitively known in writing, and to generate data and to operate from this perspective of data-driven decision making. Too often we find ourselves or we are accused of operating out of emotion and out of our guesstimate or feelings, which are valid on the one hand, but sometimes difficult to stand up, certainly in a court of law or in the court of public opinion. I see Bree is here. There she is again. So we lost you for a second, Bree.
I'm so sorry. Okay, so the ACLU, you said the ACLU did release the comparison study for the use of force of St. Paul and Minneapolis?
Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. I would love to see that.
Sure.
Okay, so this is one of the things that I think is the next really big hurdle, or not hurdle, but like task that I have to undertake, which is figuring out how to better link to all the available sources for this information. Because I do think organizations like ACLU have advocated along the police of use of force lines and getting data and getting policy changes for a long time. So I'd like to figure out how to link to smaller, more regional projects and figure out how to get that information to the site. I think the only way that this works, because of how messed up the data infrastructure is through sort of this democratization of the collection, right? I don't know if crowdsourcing is exactly the right word, but kind of like crowdsourcing. We do have a FOIA request template available on our site that people can download, fill out, submit to their local jurisdiction, and then upload anything they get into the repository side. But our hope is to keep expanding. I'm going to try to get with the 2 main vendors that provide the infrastructure for open city or open data portals for cities, and see if I can get them to notify us when they get a new city with a new open data portal, things like that. We're anything and everything to get this information available to the public.
Were you able to pull your PowerPoint together or your slide? Yeah.
Yes, I have it. Just really quickly, I was going to let you know. So the 14 cities we have on the site are Austin, Baltimore, Cincinnati, Dallas, Indianapolis, Lincoln, Minneapolis, New Orleans, Omaha, Orlando, Portland, Seattle, Stockton, and Tulsa.
It's a good group.
I'm surprised Atlanta wasn't on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
With their information.
We picked these 14 cities ended up being on there on the Data Explorer because they gave us the most robust data sets. Yeah. Okay. Now let me see if I can share here. Share screen. Chrome tab. Haha. Can everyone see this?
Not yet.
Okay.
Here we go, I think.
Accountable now, yes.
Okay. Great. Let me start on the right slide. So some of this is information that has already been, we'll go over. So this is, we won't frame this as much the problem, just that there's so many police departments in the US all recording their data differently, and police are using force against the public every single day, and we don't have a comprehensive way to track it. So as I mentioned, it's both a repository, that's the data, or that's the progress map side, and it's also a source of harmonization and data analysis through the Data Explorer. And we want to build power at the local level for folks who are advocating for transformational change in public safety. And we want to really highlight just how abysmal the current use of force infrastructure is, which to us puts another sort of brick on the path for the argument for complete criminal legal system transformation. What's new in this new phase, the new launch, is the 9 additional cities. There's data visualizations available now that can show a comparison of up to 5 cities at a time with cross filters on race, gender, and use of force. There's also, as I mentioned, the use of force categories with definitions. There's the city-specific pages with data visualizations, and there's also a resource page that's going to continue to evolve with articles, data stories, and research briefs. So let's, Minneapolis, many of these already were highlighted by Al. One thing I wanted to highlight is MPD does not report the officers who use force. So I think that we don't have specific identifiers for the officers. I mean, it doesn't have to be their name, right? It could even be like a number. So you could see how many times one officer is showing up in the use of force reports. So we don't have any information about their race or ethnicity, their age, their years of experience in the force, or if they live in the city. 9% of the victims of police use of force from 2017 to 2019 had their race marked as either unknown or other. That's something I try to pay attention to when I'm looking at any of these 14 cities, is where are the areas where, when we take a granular look at the use of force data, as we're able to on this site, do we see need for additional detail, right? MPD also reported, I think this is really interesting, reported 0 firearm displays in 2019. But they reported them the previous 2 years. They had 55 altogether, which makes me think there was a change in the way MPD reported their use of force sometime in 2018.
How do they define firearm displays, Bree?
That's a good question. I do not know. I think this is one of the things that's been a really interesting challenge for the data scientist team who did the harmonization. Basically, they had to, I think if a department offered definitions as part of their policies, then they could use that to inform how they did the harmonization. But otherwise, they just had to go off the actual name of the categorization. So probably what this...
Yeah, I'm sorry. One of the defenses that law enforcement agencies are using for stop and search for pretextual searches is the number of illegal firearms that turn up during these searches. And I was curious whether the display was done by law enforcement staff or whether it was done by someone they were using force against.
Oh, I see. Nope. In this instance, it should be it means that the officer displayed their weapon.
Okay.
So they like brandished their weapon at someone. Yeah. The extreme disproportionality in who experiences use of force, as mentioned by Al, and then also the increase in use of tasers.
Yeah, the amazing thing for me is that this almost mirrors in those categories the use of force report in the city of St. Paul. Yeah,
that's super interesting.
A lot of similarities between the two cities.
One of my absolute favorite features on the site now is for each of the cities and each of the 14 cities, when you go to the city-specific page, you can select a view that will break down the types of use of force that were showing up in each of the years. One of the things I always look for is, I don't know if you can see it, but down here at the bottom, I look for lines that don't go all the way across. So you can see the firearm brandishing. That's this kind of dark green line here at the bottom, and it ends in 2018. That's, to me, anytime I see one of these shortened lines, I'm like, oh, they shifted something about the way they were reporting their use of force. Most likely, it's not likely they all of a sudden stopped brandishing their weapon at people, right? And so where did that information go is one of my questions. And then you can also see that restraints other than handcuffs picked up. There's a new line that starts in 2018, 2019, which is another thing that makes me think they changed something of their reporting policy around 2018.
Do you have any idea why the use of force increased 73% between 2017 and 2019? Is it
for the taser?
Oh, okay.
No, I don't. That's the taser. Is that what you mean?
Well,
This
your
one?
previous slide showed a 73% increase between 2017 and 2019. And I was wondering if you had an idea.
That's
You know,
specifically for tasers.
tasers, okay. That's
Yeah.
probably aligned with when they began the implementation, 2017.
That would be my guess, is that there may have been, like, maybe they were piloting it in 2017, and then 2018 to 2019 more officers had access to tasers. That would be
Okay.
one just guesstimate. But I think one of the things that really came out of this for me is like how many more questions you can have once you see the data at a granular level, right? Like if we don't have access to the data with this kind of breakdown, we don't even know for sure what questions to ask of a specific police department. And so for me, I was very interested to look at the takedown. I was like, wow, they do this way more than they do any other thing. At least that's what they report. So I'm curious about what goes into that. So that's here in this next slide I pulled out. Also on the site, underneath the line chart, you can see the trends, the percentage of increase or decrease. And so I just wanted to pull out two specific definitions from our harmonization standard. One is the taser. I was just pulling out the definition. So when they're mapping what police actually give us into this harmonization standard, these are the categories. When it says includes, those are the categories that were included in this harmonization category.
So is impact weapon, is that tasers?
Sorry, say again. Impact weapon. Oh, here.
Yeah.
No, I think that impact weapon is often something like, what do they call them? Like pepper balls or the beanbag type guns, that they would use for like crowd control.
Yeah.
So for takedown, I was like, wow, Minneapolis PD is out here doing a lot of takedowns. What are they? And so when I read the definitions, these are the different types of police categories that map to takedown: forcible takedowns, handcuffing takedown, held suspect down, body weight leverage, physical takedown, bodily force, physical weight leverage, right? All these different things. To me, that's really important because that is exactly a type of category that often does not get captured. And I was thinking about if I'm a citizen just walking around and a random person comes up and takes me down onto the ground, that is a traumatizing experience that I will carry with me for the rest of my life.
Sure.
What is it like for me when an armed agent of the state does it to me? Or I see them do it to my neighbor, or I hear of them doing it to my family member, and it's something I see all the time, right? There's a level of trauma that's being created, and we're not even capturing the data points to validate people's experience when they're walking around and interacting with agents of the state. So I think this is really significant, and it's one thing I'm really happy that we're getting this more detailed information.
That's
Because some
interesting.
departments don't
As an aside, Bree, Brenda has a story in Monday's paper. It's our lead story, and I think the title in the story is "Traumatized a Second Time," and it's a story about the children who were witness to the George Floyd murder, including the young lady who shot the video that earned her Pulitzer Prize special mention. But the story centers around a letter and public comments from Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison decrying the comments of the Hennepin County Judge Peter Cahill, who presided over the George Chauvin trial. And in his remarks concluding the trial at sentencing, Judge Cahill talked about trauma, basically saying that the state did not prove that the minors who were present at the event experienced trauma. And he based that, he said, on the fact that some of the video shows them, or an incident or so, of children either laughing or smiling, right? And that they could have walked away. And the reason it's important is because the capacity to have the impact on children is one of the tools or standards they could use in departing from the norms, upward departure from the sentencing guidelines. There was an upward departure, but it did not include
the reason that this crime, this murder, was committed in front of and witnessed by children. And that is one of
7-year-olds.
the specific stated
Yeah.
reasons that there could be a departure upward for.
Yeah.
So
And Al,
that, go ahead.
Al, those
Youssef.
children were as young as 7 years old.
Yeah.
Who witnessed that? Sad. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. So, I mean, that's just an aside to talk about this whole question of how we look at this and how we understand it. And that's why this discussion is important. I think it's important to have kind of a normalized and data-driven ability to understand trends, history, experiences, and expectations. Too often, we have this blanket acceptance of the idea that police people are omnipotent, right? And there is this public what's the right word for it? Public acceptance in many ways of the unbridled authority that policemen try to represent in dealing with Black people, people of color, with poor people. And this discussion is one of the pathways for unpacking how that consensus emerges that gives rogue officers the freedom to act inappropriately and illegally and deprive citizens of their rights, and in the case of George Floyd, of their life.
I think I totally agree. I think that there's been, the idea that it's difficult to collect the data, that there's infrastructure difficulties for police departments in recording this information has just been accepted sort of like a blank check, right? It's like, okay, but that exact lack of attention to detail, that lack of discipline in capturing the information has really, really obfuscated the problem. It's really made it easy for people to deny that it's happening.
Right.
And that's what we cannot have anymore. I mean, we have to have data that shows what we see with our own eyes.
Is Congress working on anything to force police departments to report data?
Okay, so let me say this before I say anything, because I come from the program side of the Leadership Conference House. I'm much more experienced sort of on the more on the ground with engaging at the neighborhood level around public safety stuff from my background. And now I'm at the Leadership Conference working on projects like Accountable Now. So let me say that because I'm not the expert on that in my workplace. But my understanding is that that's one of the things on the table when talking about legislation to change policing in the United States is, in particular, databases around, what's the term, misconduct, right? So like we're in a situation where if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you work for the military and you exhibit misconduct, neglect, or other types of issues, then you can be disbarred, right? Or delicensed in a way that makes it so you can no longer serve as a doctor or a lawyer or in the military. And there's no equivalent in policing, and there should be. And so that's one of the things I think that's happening in the legislative discussions is like, we need a national database of officer misconduct that should be available to the public that makes it so that police officers can't department hop, which is a huge issue. In terms of national use of force database, I'm not sure actually if there is a federal push right now to any kind of legislative push to get that done, which is, again, one of the reasons why Leadership Conference said, okay, we're going to try to do this because we don't see it coming from any other direction at the moment,
Okay.
But
Is Milwaukee going to be one of the cities you had?
Oh man, I would love that so much. I would like that. I will certainly be an advocate for that happening.
There you go. Excellent work. Excellent work. Thank you.
So let me ask you all, Brenda and Kamal and Youssef, to weigh in and with Bree on the value. To what end? And this is, the Accountable Now says they're putting public data in the hands of the public. The question is, to what end? And is it simply a collection, a compilation, a repository, or what is the action that can emerge from assembling data that's been there but never pulled together this way? Kamal, what do you think? And I raise this question because I'm in Minnesota. Like I said, our population is 19% African American, and that's really huge based on what it was when I first got here. And I think, Yusuf, you're from here, right? You native?
Yes, sir. Born, raised, and miseducated right here.
Okay, so we've watched the emergence of Black and communities that are non-white
We
in
weren't.
Minnesota over the past generation or two. So in the back of my mind is this question of white power represented by policing, and Black people, Black bodies, Black skin, brown skin. And then Kamal, you're in Atlanta, and I don't know this, but I'm wondering, you've got, obviously it's a Black city, or perceived by me to be a Black city. Are the questions we're raising here that have to do with race and police force the same questions that can and should be raised about policing and citizens, where both the police and the citizens are Black? Is that a question that's worth raising, and do you think about that? Does that come into play for you anywhere, Bree?
I believe that it does. And it collection of data should work both ways. It should help those who are crying about misuse of force, and it should help the police identify if there actually is misuse of force, and if so, where it's occurring, who it's occurring to, and who it's occurring by. Mm-hmm. Who's causing the occurrence to happen. They already, I believe the police already know the bad apples in their department, and that's a whole cultural question that they have to face as police officers. How do they handle that? But here in Atlanta, I know that according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is our major paper here, trying to get information from the police or from any pretty much government agency is like pulling teeth. The Atlanta Journal have lawyers who are regularly in court trying to get public information from the government, including the police. So I believe that a collection of data is absolutely necessary, so that the people who are complaining have some basis on which to complain, and that the police officers, the police departments have some information also on which to defend themselves or to look at to try to make corrections.
Brenda, what are your thoughts? You probably can look at this as an educator and as a citizen. You've written about both the challenges of living in neighborhoods that are not always safe, right? Where you need police protection, but you've also written about when officers don't act in a professional way and therefore betray the public trust. How does this question of collecting data sound and look to you?
I was listening to Bree, and I was wondering what defines a rogue cop when it comes to the training of young recruits that come in that look, peachy dandy, and then all of a sudden turn into a shaman. And I think that George Floyd already gave us the platform where the world saw what the possibilities were, not just to him, but across the board for Black males especially. What bothers me, and I heard Dr. B refer to this, is our respect toward one another, where it ends up maybe the data becomes skewed in the process of the collection of violence that we're experiencing now, not just in the Twin Cities, but across the country. So I think we need it. I'm just wondering how we would use it, how we would attack the pipeline from the school to the incarceration percentages. There are a lot of levels there, but I think it's so needed. I'm really concerned about the high suspension rate of young Black males in public schools, and that's always been the case. And then when you go into the prisons, you'll know that a lot of them are dropouts, and a lot of it started with a discipline act that really didn't call for that type of punishment. So a lot of levels. I admire you Bree, for the work that you're doing. It has to be like brain drain sometimes because of trying to figure out where all the numbers really go, where they make sense and they can help, like Kamal said, on both sides. It can validate what the police are saying, but also what the citizens are saying about police brutality in their neighborhoods. So that's where I'm coming from.
And so, Bree, the question becomes, to what end? How does the organization, how does the project Accountable Now envision the data collected can be used to move the question of equality, justice, and fairness forward?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and I think there's levels. I really appreciate the Brenda, your conversation about levels, right? Because there's levels to all of this. The criminal legal system has so many problems grounded in white supremacy, grounded in classism that we see showing up at every single layer of the system. Accountable Now has the goals that I already mentioned for sort of like its day-to-day life, right? There's also, I think, a meta goal that has to do with being a launching pad for people into this broader work. So I will use the example of Vision for Justice is a policy platform the Leadership Conference has. It's a comprehensive policy platform for reimagining public safety across America. And it has, I think, like 12 or 13 plus planks. Policing is one plank. Accountable Now is one section of one part of that plank, right? So it's looking at pretrial, it's looking at prosecutorial discretion, it's looking at mass incarceration, it's looking at reentry, it's looking at cash bail, it's looking at the war on drugs, right? So inside of each of those planks, which is the things I was mentioning, are like the planks, and then inside there's like 10 plus policy moves that can be made at the state and local level to help change this paradigm. And I think for me, the meta kind of goal, like the slightly behind the scenes goal of Accountable Now, is to help people bolster work they're already doing on criminal legal reform. I don't even like the word reform, like transformation, which is what's required. This isn't little R reform time. This is like complete overhaul time. But also to draw people who aren't currently engaged in that work into the work, because I was just thinking about this today, right? So the criminal legal system is like this tangled ball, white supremacy, classism, like just hugely impactful across the entire thing. And it can be really overwhelming for people. And particularly if you haven't had a direct experience with the injustice within the system, it maybe seems really distant to you. I think that police use of force is actually one of the entry points that people can get behind, because they've seen it now for themselves, whether or not they've experienced it directly. They've seen it. You can't deny what you've seen. And if you are, then you've got problems of your own kind that I don't know how to help you with if you don't believe your own eyes, right? But if you believe your own eyes and you're starting to say like, hey, wait a minute, this use of force conversation, which Accountable Now lets people have, gives people data, helps them think about, I want to use Accountable Now. Like, oh, you uploaded data from your local jurisdiction. and you didn't get the data you wanted and you're upset about it because you didn't know it was that hard, come over to Vision for Justice and let's show you what you can do locally. Or you did get the FOIA information. You can't believe what you're seeing from your police department. Great. Now you're motivated. You want to get involved more. Let's go to Vision for Justice and see where look, right? So I think it's a launching pad. That's the end for me. It's a public education campaign, but it's also a launching pad into more aspects of this work. And if you'll pardon me for 1 second, I just want to address the rogue officer conception. So just for a little bit of my background, I worked directly in a police district station as a nonprofit employee, as a member of a cross-sector unit when I first started working in Milwaukee. And so I've worked out of a cop shop before. I've seen how interactions go. I've seen what the culture and vibe of the place can be. And here's what I think. I think good people can do bad things in a toxic environment. And until we address that toxic environment, there's no bad. To me, this is not a bad apple cop situation at all. We have a policing infrastructure that sets people up for failure. And we talk about trauma goes on both sides as well. Police officers are walking. I had this incredible conversation with a veteran police officer at a really good reputation. He was a veteran of the military as well. And I will never, as long as I live, forget this. He said to me, I've seen way more messed up stuff as a police officer in my home than I ever did when I was at war. And we're just starting to figure out how to talk to soldiers about trauma and caring about PTSD. But he said, but nobody talks about it with officers, and it's happening where they're living. And so I think that has really resonated with me. Like, our current structure doesn't take care of the community. We know what makes communities thrive. When our communities are healthy, well-resourced, and thriving, that's what makes communities safe. Our current infrastructure prevents people from health, prevents people from being able to be well-resourced because it costs so much money. But it also prevents health for officers. And it causes trauma. So I think there's so much. Sorry, that was a rant, my bad. But
no, that's what we need to hear. Thank you so much for sharing. Tell more about your background, Bree. Take a minute and talk about how you arrived at this work.
Sure. So I met my husband in undergrad. He was an undergrad too. We were both philosophers. He grew up to be a philosophy professor, and he knew that's what he wanted to do. And there's like 3 jobs in that. So we just go where the jobs are. And I knew I wanted to work with people, and there's people everywhere, for better or for worse, right? So I was like, I can go along and figure out what I want to do. I spent some time volunteering and worked my way to volunteering for a needle exchange clinic when I lived in Rochester, New York, and had a pivotal day where I was out picking up dirty needles with somebody who worked at the organization in a Rochester segregated city. So it was a predominantly Black neighborhood. It had been hit early before the bubble burst, but it was like the pre-warning of the 2008 bubble burst of the housing. So we're picking up needles in this house. And I just looked down the street and I saw half of it's vacant. A couple other houses are full. There was one house that was booming. Okay. Huge satellite dish, people coming and going, people stopping through, in and out, in and out. I saw a squad car drive down the street, and I thought, they know exactly what's happening here. And nothing. And then we were in the back of the house, and a white guy came around the back of the house, and he said something to my colleague, and she got angry, and I never saw her angry. She's a really experienced street outreach worker. And I said, what happened? And she said, I'm wearing a vest. I have a sharps container. You know why I'm here. He just asked me where the drugs were. Unbelievable. And I watched that white kid drive out of the neighborhood and I'm like, oh, so this is what happens. You're a parasite. You come in here, you have eyeballs, you can see what's happening. You're going to drive in and get your drugs, and you're going to go back to your suburb, and you're going to talk crap about this city. And that for me was like a real eye-opening experience. And from then I went to grad school, ended up in Milwaukee, and said, I want to work at the municipal level. I want to do something with public safety, and just get into it. And that's what brought me on my pathway here. And actually, if you'll indulge me, my leadership conference experience, the shift from local to leadership conference came pretty organically, because last year I was like, I'd had enough. I'm like, okay, I've worked a lot with law enforcement on the ground. I need to start thinking of ways to help reform things in my city. A colleague of mine said, why don't you meet with Fred Royal, who's the head of the local NAACP chapter here. And we were talking about police reform. He works on it locally. And he said, have you heard of the Leadership Conference? Check out their report on the new era for public safety. Went to the website, was blown away, saw they were hiring. Here I am.
While you were off, Yusuf was saying he's experienced a little bit with the organization. Yusuf, comments, feedback?
Well, as the former president of a public policy research organization, I share Bree's frustration because one of the things we learned very early was that the data will confess to almost anything, depending how long you either selectively edit it or dig deeper into it. And because each department sets its own parameters for how they want to report, that creates a difficulty in looking at a standard set of data. My sense is that the data can be misleading because you're looking at areas of high poverty, areas of racial concentration. You're looking at areas where the primary vehicle, is a hoopty, which means if it breaks down, they leave it on the curb and walk to wherever they're going because it ain't worth fixing. And you're looking at areas where people have requested a greater police presence because of some of the illegal activity that takes place. So you've got all these counterbalancing factors contributing to the data flow. And I think it's very important. We met with the chief of police in St. Paul and his leadership team 2 weeks ago. We've had a 20-year agreement that was mediated by the Justice Department between the local NAACP and the St. Paul Police Department based on racial profiling, which led to increased stops, searches, and use of force, and pretextual stops in particular, where you get pulled over because of a taillight or a Christmas tree air freshener hanging from your rearview mirror, and then they want to search your vehicle for drugs or illegal guns, and you wind up getting charged for felonies and other offenses that weren't obvious when you were pulled over. In fact, we have a long-running feud with one of our state legislators about this very topic in terms of racial profiling. But the community has to ask the right questions. And frequently, as you said, it's difficult to know what questions to ask. Is the data accurate? What does it reflect? When you look at the racial data, a lot of our communities of color have large Native American populations. They have large Asian populations. They have significant African American populations. But when you look at the data, it's the African American community that shows up with the alarming statistics. In St. Paul, 16% of the population, 46% of the stops, 75% of the use of force incidents with young men of color between 18 and 25. So as you look at the data, there are many areas for reform. And I think it's important to have a civil but a brutally honest discussion with the people who set policy for local law enforcement, whether it's the sheriff, whether it's the highway patrol, whether it's the police department, whether it's the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, or all of the above. And I think the county attorneys need to be a part of that discussion because they get the information from law enforcement for a lot of the pretextual stops that turn into felony warrants where people lose their job, the family breaks down, they're incarcerated, and, they start that downward slide into that school to prison or community to prison pipeline. So we really do need to undress the data, take a careful look at it, and ask all the questions we can come up with that are not answered in the data that is released, because a lot of it is selectively edited in order to tell the story that the law enforcement community wants the broader community to hear. And as I said, the data will confess to anything if it is selectively edited or dug into deep enough for long enough, depending on who's polishing or editing that material before it gets publicly released. And we have to make certain that the information is accurate, that it's honest, and that it provides a foundation for an honest discussion about how we move forward with the law enforcement, criminal justice, legislative, public policy community, so that we can correct some of the toxic aspects that travel across that environment. And we're blessed because we have a good relationship with the St. Paul Police Department and the Ramsey County Sheriff, but at the same time, as I said at the opening to the show, we're the city that has the largest number of officer-involved killings in the state. And as a result of COVID alone last year, the life expectancy for African Americans went down by 3 full years. And COVID is the reason for that. And, 30 to 45% of our community has refused to get vaccinated. And if they were as willing to get vaccinated as they are to get the oxygen and the antibodies and the antibiotics when they go to the hospital with the, life-threatening result of COVID and Delta and all these variants, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in. So we've got a tremendous job to do on many fronts, and the law enforcement front is as much a priority as the life or death, results of the dirt nap that COVID is causing disproportionately in our community. So again, thank you for your efforts and keep up the good work. And I'll send Al the data on St. Paul and Ramsey County and encourage him to share it with you, Bree, because I believe, Al, you've got her email address.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
And Bree, I hope we look for some type of component that the schools could work with. I'm really concerned about cutting off this pipeline before they get to the point of where they are. And I think that data, that leadership in schools, especially middle school, that 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, if there's some way that teachers could look at what they're doing as far as discipline and cut it off before it grows even bigger.
Listen, we're out of time. What a great conversation, Bree Spencer. Thank you so very much. Bree is with the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights of the project, an important project. Let me get my notes here. And it's accountable now. Data on police use of force. The goal is to get data from 1,000 law enforcement departments across the country, and they're on the way. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time. Take care. Thank you, Bree.
Good seeing you, Kamal.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Stay safe.
Nice to meet you all.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye, Youssef, and good meeting you, Bree.
Good to meet
Bye-bye.
you too. Thanks.
And let's see.
And next week, Al, let's talk about this 2013 killing of Terrence Franklin in Minneapolis, because they're about to reopen that case. Keith Ellison and Mike Freeman are looking at new evidence, a video that occurred shortly before SWAT team shot him 10 times, 5 times in the head and 5 times in other parts of his body.
Let's do that. We also have one that was going to be on today, but maybe next week, and that's I think I sent you notice. It's about Atiba Mudayan, who is a political analyst. He was a Republican. He's left that party and is doing commentary around the East Coast. And he's going to talk about things like Cuba, the current state of unrest on the streets in Cuba, but also the Biden initiatives in what couple of areas, among them trying to see if they're going to be able to get past the filibuster in getting his legislative platforms passed. So a lot to do, but that's a great topic. And thank you guys. We'll see you next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.